this is Rusty here at FCP Euro, and today we're going to be going over the ignition service on our B9 Audi S5, equipped with the 3-liter turbocharged EA839 engine. So, in front of me on the table is two of the kits that we carry, one being the OEM with the NGK spark plugs, the other being the 034 Motorsport with the spacer kit as well as the dielectric grease. The spacer kit is to keep the harness off of the top of the ignition coils because they do have an added heatsink that we will need to clearance slightly. The Permatex grease to put a little bit of grease so that they don't get stuck on the spark plugs for future removal. And the OEM actually has the grease already pre-installed. And we'll be going over the replacement with the upgraded kit here. So the manufacturer's interval is about 40,000 miles or 6 years. On the RS models with the similar equipped engine, it is about a 30,000 mile 4-year interval. So it's mainly up to you, depending on driving style, how you'd like to go about the maintenance schedule, but the manufacturer does suggest the 40,000 mile 6-year interval. And if you are having any poor fuel economy, poor throttle response, or lack of power, you may be experiencing a fouled or weak spark plug, or possibly with a misfire, you could have a failed ignition coil. And if you are replacing any of the ignition coils due to a misfire, it is highly suggested to replace all 6 at the same time, or 4 depending on the engine you have. And the reason being is that if one has failed, likely the others are not far behind. Most of the time you'll have 6 of the same date code on the vehicle from production, and if one has failed, again, the others are short to follow. And our B9 S5 behind us has about 75,000 miles and is about 7 years old. We are unsure of the history on that, so this should be about the second service due on this car based on mileage, about 5,000 miles shy, and based on time, it is due for its first service. Now that we've gone over the parts on the table, let's get into some of the tools that we'll need to tackle the job. Going over some tools here, obviously for starters, you are going to need a specific spark plug socket. This vehicle is equipped with a 12mm 12-point spark plug. You will need a 13mm in order to remove the posts that you'll be installing the spacer on. You'll also need a 7mm. I have it in a 1/4-inch drive, a T30 bit as well as a T25 bit, pocket screwdriver or a small screwdriver, a 90-degree or small pick. I have a panel tool for removing some of the harness pieces, and then we have the ignition coil puller. If those ignition coils are giving you a little bit of a hard time, they're kind of submerged under the foam and they're difficult to get without damaging other components, this will be a great deal of help to insert into the ignition coil and give you a good point to pull on. I have a 3/8 torque wrench. I have a 3/8 ratchet with a flexible section, 1/4-inch ratchet. I have a locking head here. With the extensions, I have a couple of different lengths. So now that we've gone over all the tools that we're going to need for the job, let's go ahead and get started. So in doing the ignition service, going over the instructions, the manufacturer does want the DME or ECU removed. However, in order to do that, you do have to disconnect the battery in the trunk. We're going to leave this all connected, but removing the bracket below and then sliding the DME ECU out of the way just to gain access to the ignition coils. So just to gain a little bit more access and loosen up some of the harness, we're going to just pop off the engine cover and then set that aside. If you are working on this vehicle, you do want to have it at least at operating temperature. A lot of the plastic and grommets and things will come apart a little bit easier if they are warm, but you obviously don't want it extremely hot. If you were to put a rag down on this, it could catch the rag on fire if there's any oils on it, so just keep that in mind. We are going to just release the ECU from the hold downs here, prying on these clips. You don't really want to use a screwdriver or anything, just kind of use your thumb to allow the clips to move out of the way. There is a series of fasteners usually that are affixed to the bracket here. These have already been loosened up. Somebody may have been in here, but if you do have these, a pocket screwdriver, I think I have one in my pocket. Again, these are going to be mounted on the bracket here. You can just stick a pocket screwdriver and open those up a little bit in order to remove those, and we'll go ahead and reinstall those back into the proper spot. So again, just put this off to the side here while you remove the bracket, and it's just a couple of T30s. Be very, very careful. As you can see, our coolant line is already damaged. We are going to be replacing this in a later DIY, but again, just when you are removing the DME, be very careful of this coolant line. As you can see, it is extremely fragile, and if the car is hot, you will have a little bit of pressure in there. So just be mindful that you're not disrupting this coolant line when going ahead and removing the bracket. You have one piece of the harness back here. Just try to open that clip up best you can without damaging, and we've already broken that. So we'll replace that one later. Getting underneath here, popping those out, and making sure not to damage the line, and then we'll remove the harness here, just depressing the clip and then sliding it up and out of the way. Making sure there's no other harness attached. It's just 3 T30s mounting this on here. And then you can take the bracket and get it up out of the way. That'll give you a little bit more room as opposed to disconnecting this, and obviously you can flip it in any which way you want. Careful not to damage that coolant line. But I think I'll probably put a bungee cord just kind of holding it up in this way while I'm doing the work down here. So once you've got the ECU out of the way, either on the heat shield or tied up, I have it attached to the prop rod here. That'll give you access down here. We're gonna go ahead and start removing some of the components to get to the airbox. We do have to start up front here, removing the handle, the trim panel, and the air inlet before getting to the airbox itself. Before you go ahead and remove the engine airbox, we are going to just release the hood clip as well as this panel in the front. Taking a pocket screwdriver to release the clip in the back, and then I like to re-engage that so it's easier for reinstallation. Keeping in mind that this is keyed, so when you go to reinstall that, make sure you have it keyed up and lined up in the same orientation it was removed. Next, we'll be taking off the radiator cover. There's a series of clips along the front here, and it should be tucked up under the radiator support here. So we'll go ahead and release this side and then this side, making sure they're all released up underneath, and then just taking it out of the provision up front here, setting that aside. So, and we just have a couple of T25s in the front end here, and then that just pop that out there. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and remove the clamp for this. You could just leave that one on and take the airbox out as a whole. That way you don't have to take too many things apart. Just releasing that, and then this should just pop up and out of the grommets. And one of the grommets stayed, so before you put this off to the side, pop the grommets off the airbox and reinstall those into the body. So the first step before you start trying to remove the ignition coils is you got to free up the harness on top of that. And with that said, we will be spacing this harness off to give it a little bit of lift when installing those aftermarket coils. So there is a series of harnesses and connectors you can leave on. And this is going to be up to you. If you don't have the ability to remove the ignition coil, you may want to release some other connectors. We're going to just start with the ignition coils, getting these out of the way. There is a red tab here. You want to be careful not to push that too far out. Just using your thumb to depress the black section of the connector once that red tab is pulled back. If that has released that, then we just have to pop up the harness here. It is on 2 grommets, one here and one there. So you can see here we can kind of manipulate the harness here in order to get access to the 2 ones over here. You may find yourself having to disconnect some of the connectors up in this area to get that down, or disconnecting some of the grounds under here in order to pull the harness up and out of the way. So we're going to start with the one over here, as it's fairly easy, and we'll move our way towards the back. It's just a T30. Now, if you're having difficulty removing these, because they are kind of submerged in the foam here, this one's coming out with some difficulty. There is a specialty tool that is inserted into the hole where you just remove the bolt from, and when you tighten it up, it pulls the center shaft through the tool to grab the outside of it. So I'll show you how it works. Just insert it into the ignition coil, spinning the knurled fitting towards the handle. Once that is nice and tight, you then have a good little grip on it, wiggling it out, and it all comes out nice and easy. So doing the first ignition coil is fairly easy. In order to gain a little bit more access on the engine harness right here, we are going to release the O2 sensor connector down here, as well as removing some of these ground wires for the ignition coils. So again, similar connector on the ignition coils here. Get that out of the way. And then we're going to go ahead and get these 3 grounds out of here. Again, making sure you don't drop these. And it also should note, be very careful when loosening or tightening these that you don't over rotate these too quickly. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but I did have my finger against where this would be releasing the bolt. These do tend to spin, and if you break one of these, you will have to get a new spade. So we'll go ahead and get the rest of those off. So if you just take the 2 grounds off here, that'll give you plenty of room in order to get the ignition coil here, and you can move the harness as you please. But that'll just give you just enough room to manipulate that in between the 2 ignition coils. This one you may want the tool for, as it is kind of a tight spot back by the strut tower as well as the high pressure fuel pump right here. This is where this tool is really going to come in handy. Although it's not necessary, it's definitely suggested. You can see how tight that was on that spark plug. All right, so before we move on to the other side, we're going to go ahead and replace the spark plugs and also install the spacers for the harness, get the ignition coils back in, and then we'll move over to the driver's side. It doesn't have any oil soaked on it, doesn't have any carbon buildup. There's no like brown or bronze on the ceramic, which is usually some carbon tracking. The grease on the top is usually a green color. This one looks fairly brown, so these may actually be the original plugs. And again, 6 years, 7 years on this vehicle. 6 years is when they're supposed to be replaced, but the car does have 75,000 miles. I do think at some point they've been replaced, but they've been in there for a while for sure. And then we'll continue down the row. So, as with any time when you're replacing the spark plugs, you do want to verify the gap. Although the manufacturer states that they are pre-gapped, it is good practice to just make sure. And these are gapped at 0.028, and these are ideal for a tune or the upgraded ignition coils that we're doing. And we're going to be installing these preemptively for our tune. The factory spec is about 0.032, so the spark plugs that we just took out were right around that specification. So just go ahead and install them in your spark plug socket. Install those down in the bore. I like to do this by hand, a couple threads. They very well could strip. There's a fairly fine thread on them. So I'm just going to install all these plugs before getting out the torque wrench, and we'll torque all 3 down at the same time before moving on to the ignition coils. All right, now get your torque wrench. The torque specification on these is about 25 Newton meters, so we'll go ahead and tighten those down. And now at this time, before you go install the ignition coils, we will be installing the spacers on the mounting posts right here, as well as the one back here, to keep these grommets, when firmly seated on those mounting posts, a little bit elevated from the ignition coils to allow the heat sinks some air, as well as no chafing of the harness or rubbing on the heat sinks. So we're just going to take a 13 millimeter and move the harness to the side. And then you're just going to take the spacer, put it underneath the post, and this is going to keep the harness up and away from the ignition coils. So careful not to drop the spacer while you're installing it upside down. Go ahead, and there is no torque spec for this, as it's not a typically removed item. So once it's snugged up, a good 1/8 of a turn is fair. And then we have one more to install on the rear position here. So just take the spacer, installing it on there. Keep a good firm grip on the spacer while it's inserting into the threaded area here. Keeping a hand underneath not to drop it. Starting it by hand, getting it snugged up. And then just again, give it a 1/8 to 1/4 turn. You don't want it too tight, but you don't want it to loosen up from vibrations. And now we can go ahead and install our new coil packs. So before you go install them, obviously we have a little bit of dielectric grease in the kit. Just take a tiny bit of the grease, going around the very edge. This is going to make it much easier to remove the ignition coils for any future service, as these ignition coils do tend to stick to the spark plug with heat as well as over time. And they install the same as the factory ones with the same T30 bolt that you removed. And then the torque spec on the ignition coil hold down bolt is just 10 Newton meters. And now do the same for the other two on this bank. Now at this point, your ignition coils are all installed. We've already installed the spacers. And if you have taken off any additional connectors other than the ones that we've talked about in this video, now would be a good time to go ahead and put that back. We're gonna go ahead and remount the ignition coil harness here and put everything back together and move on to the other side. So again, it wouldn't be a bad idea to throw a rag down here to make sure that you don't drop any of the bolts while installing. And the torque spec on these is about 9 Newton meters. Do not over tighten these. As I stated in the beginning of the video, if they are too tight or removed too quickly, you could break the spade off the end of the wire, and then you'll have to be doing some wiring repairs just for doing spark plugs. So making sure it doesn't twist too much. 9. And that one there. After you've reinstalled the harness, after installing the spacers and ignition coils, it's time to reassemble the airbox. So making sure the airbox is going into the correct placement, lining up this one, and you can probably see or feel the front one. Line up that one because you can see it. You can kind of feel this one, and then this one will fall back into place. Get your intake boot line back up. Now we're going to put in the intake snorkel here, fitting it into the airbox, and then up into the front cowl area. And we did leave one of the screws here from previous, so we'll get that one finger tight and reinstall the other side. All right, and those are not very tight because you could damage the intake cowl. As you see here, this bolt's not securing in there. Airbox is in, intake is in, and then you do have a series of clips in the front. You just want to sink all down there. So ensure the clips in the front are secured and the panel is tucked under the radiator support right there. And then again, this is keyed. You do have two matching receiving portions that match up here. Line those up. And this should snap right in place. Theoretically, there we go. So once it's on there, give it a couple of tugs so that you know it's not going to come off when the hood's closed, because that'll make for a very fun time to reopen. That is nice and secured. Now we're going to move on over to the driver's side and finish up what we had started over here after removing the DME. All right, so in order to get the harness off without damaging the PCV hoses, we do want to be very careful when removing these. Normally you can use your index finger and thumb and squeeze while removing, but as you can see here, somebody else has already broken this one. So all we need to do is release the tab on the back side here while releasing that either with a pick or a pocket screwdriver. And then this one, just pulling it up slightly. All right. That one, just rest that above the PCV so it doesn't re-engage. And then we're gonna have to tackle this one as well. Trying to gently pull up on the sides because this one's very hard to get your fingers in, and it doesn't look like someone had re-engaged that all the way anyway, making our life a lot easier on removal. So I will like to note that the other side here is not very easy to remove. So do leave it on that side, and you can rotate this up and out of your way so that you can work over here much more freely. Once that's taken care of, there is normally a tab on the back side of here. This vehicle, obviously someone's been in here previously. Normally you would just put your finger or pocket screwdriver and depress the tab down, which hopefully you'll have on your vehicle, and pull up, pulling it off the post here, and then you'll have one rubber grommet back here to just yank up and away. So that's been taken care of. We're off the posts back here. Let's start by freeing up some of this wiring harness. So one thing I'd like to note back here is our specific connector on this cam adjuster or cam magnet back here. It does not have the red locking tab that would normally be there. When we were viewing on the other side, you'll see a lot of connectors that have the red locking tab. It's a safety tab similar to the ignition coils. When it does not have that engaged, you don't need to do anything in order to remove it, but that does prevent the tab from being depressed. So if you do have that tab, get that tab up and out of the way without breaking it, and then you're able to depress that. This is going to give you a little bit of added movement. There's also a plastic wire harness tie down back here you can just pop out. You may need to use a panel tool depending on how long that's been in there. And we'll start by removing some of the ignition coil connectors to give us a little bit more room here as well. So similar to the other side, we pull the red tabs back for the ignition coils. So again, similar to the other side, be careful when removing these ground bolts. That should give you more than enough to wiggle things around. and pull the ignition coils up in this direction. And now go ahead and remove the coils. I'm going to free up this fuel injector connector back here just to give me a little more space to pull this. These injector connectors are very finicky, as you can see. Somebody else has already tried to take the red tab out and they lost it and broke it, so we'll be replacing that later on. Trying to get under this foam. You do want to try to get under and watch the tab as you're prying, because you don't want to break the connector. You want to just pull on the tab just enough to get it up out of the way. That should give you just enough room to get that ignition coil out. And when you're doing this one, you want to kind of have a controlled pull as to not damage the harness. Once it finally releases, undo the tool and kind of separate them while it's still in the car. And again, be very, very careful around this coolant hose. I'm definitely being a little bit less careful because I already know it's damaged and we're replacing it. Up and out of the way. Now we can go ahead and replace the spark plugs and install the one spacer on this side. So, similar to the other side, just go ahead and remove your spark plugs. All right, spark plugs are tight. It is now time to install the one spacer on this side to the one post right next to your oil cap. All right, now we're ready to go install our upgraded coil packs, reinstall the harness, and wrap this side back up. And just like we discussed on the other side, do not forget to grease your coils. When you're installing these, you want to make sure you push on the body of the coil, not on the heatsink itself. And then this last one is installed a little bit at an angle. And same as on the other side, 10 Newton meters on the ignition coil packs. Making sure this harness right here, I don't know if you can see that, for this sensor right by the throttle body, make sure you pull that up out of the way. When you're tightening this bolt on this front coil pack, you can pinch that and cause some problems. All right, let's go ahead and get the harness back into place before we get those grounds going. The one that we did take off in the back here, this the fuel injector connector. Make sure that's firmly seated down there. Get your ignition coils lined up and connected, making sure to push in the red tab after you've engaged the connector. Keep lining up the bracket in the back first on both of those tabs. Again, ours does not have the engagement tab back here, so just line it up there, push that on, and then make sure your tab where ours is not located is secured in the back here. Then you can finish up with the grounds as well as the harnesses that we removed in the back. And we'll go ahead and get the grounds reinstalled. All right, making sure the coolant line that we moved out of the way is back in its little grommet here. Careful not to damage this thing as it's made out of pressed baby powder. And then we're gonna go reinstall our PCV valve again, or PCV hose rather. Kind of tip this at an angle down below the oil cap here. Engage the lower one first, giving it a tug to make sure it's secured. And then again, on that one there, that clip is a little bit damaged here, but we will be replacing this in a later DIY. Now that we've got this all taken care of, we can start reassembling the DME bracket and get the vehicle started up. We're gonna go ahead and remove the tether we had, keeping the DME fixed to the hood prop. Take your rag, flop it back over. Hopefully that's not still hot. And we'll reinstall the bracket here. There, and again, our coolant line is a mess, so please disregard the fitment of this coolant line. We will be going back over that in another DIY. This harness goes up and over, and then there is a little, there's a notch down here that sits on a post there. There may have been a piece of hardware there that was not installed when we removed that, so I apologize if you have that on your vehicle. Making sure the harness is reinstalled. So we're going to re-engage this. Making sure everything still lines up. Again, your coolant hose would normally lock into here. So we're going to reinstall those screws and flop the DME back in. Start the vehicle up. And if you don't want to mess with this bracket and would like to remove the DME, definitely just disconnect the negative terminal on the battery. Get the DME off, set it off to the side, and these connectors can lay right in this place. But I do advise to remove this bracket just to give yourself a little bit of extra room when getting to this front ignition coil. That's all secured. I'm just gonna flop this over. The back side towards the windshield will tuck in to the bracket here. And if it is all lined up correctly, it should just click into place. There you have it. We're gonna just reline this harness back up in the correct orientation. Making sure your harness is all back together. Everything is secured. Your PCV harness or hose is back in place. Your coolant line is back in its mounting positions. Now it's time to start the vehicle up, make sure we have no misfires, making sure we have no faults, making sure we have no other issues. All right, so once you've started up the vehicle, making sure there are no misfires, making sure there's no lights on the dash and everything is hunky-dory, go ahead and reinstall your engine cover. Just clipping it onto the grommets, making sure you're in the right places. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please hit that like button. If you have any further questions, comments, or concerns, drop them in the comment section below. And as always, please subscribe for any further DIYs, as we have plenty more on this vehicle and many others like it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.